Irina, great to have you with us. What do you make of that statement or the warning rather, by the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz? I mean, is this collapse that he talks about terminal, or is he referring specifically to the breach in the relationship between the United States and Europe?
First, need to understand what exactly the post-1945 order actually means in terms of European strategic culture and strategic understanding. It sort of ties together several different assumptions. Those assumptions include American primacy, US willingness to underwrite Europe's security with conventional forces and an extended nuclear umbrella, predictable trade rules, and a basic expectation that borders in Europe are not revised by force. So well, everyone has focused on the comment about the European pillar of security and that Europeans have to do more in terms of their own self-defense. This idea is not really about a philosophical shift in understanding. It's about actually understanding the new reality of a policy pivot that has actually been underway since Crimea and accelerated, but not started by the full-scale Ukraine invasion. We are talking about the US taking a backseat to some of the European theaters of war and trying to pivot to other interests, including the Western Hemisphere in the case of the Trump administration. We are talking about the fact that other powers are trying to weaponize global supply chains, and the fact that there is also a growing US-China rivalry that is almost a diversion from US focus on other security issues. There's also a credibility premium that Europe has historically enjoyed, outsourcing strategic risk to Washington. In that previous model, Germany was able to lead economically while treating hard power as a reputational liability, and that was by design. This was not an accident. This was not mere laziness on the part of the Germans. This was how US, in part, wanted it to be, but that is not a reality that either side can afford given the global security shifts, with Russia acting as an imperial power, with China becoming much more aggressive and militant, and not only through economic means, but also through military hard power and asymmetrical power means, and of course other security threats that are in line with this new security trajectory. This posture no longer buys safety for NATO as a whole or for Europeans specifically, and Europe is now facing daily coercion that US cannot sustain, even if it was still fully invested into NATO the same way as before the Trump administration. In other words, this is not just about Trump and his personal preferences. It's also about the reality that the risks cannot be sustained from across the Atlantic. There needs to be a local buy-in to deal with the daily reality of the new strategy by adversarial powers.
Irina, isn't Chancellor Merz being a little bit disingenuous here when he says that the rules-based order is collapsing? I mean, if we look at Germany, for instance, it's being a willing participant in what a UN panel has called a genocide against Palestinians in Gaza. When it comes to breaking the rules, it doesn't come more egregious than that. So isn't he partly responsible for the breakdown of this rules-based order?
Well, the word genocide used by the United Nations is in itself quite disingenuous. There has been no evidence of genocide. There has been the unfortunate reality of the deadly toll of a war where a terrorist organization with absolutely no moral scruples holds its own population under its control hostage and makes them into inevitable victims of a fight that Hamas itself started. Unfortunately, it's terrible. Wars are terrible, but a genocide, a deliberate extermination of an entire people, definitely that did not happen. Moreover, regardless of how you characterize the war between Israel and Gaza, Germany was not a partner in that war. And to try to turn a law-abiding state into some sort of a genocidal entity is the worst of propaganda that can be used. But it is true that Germany has perhaps did not help the current security situation overall by, for instance, taking down its own nuclear power, becoming excessively dependent on Russia, and maintaining economic ties with Russia that fueled the war that fueled and helped finance the war in Ukraine. That is something that Germany should take responsibility for, and fortunately is starting a shift in the right direction.
Okay, thank you. Irina Tsukerman talking to us there.